here. We'll just get started. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight for our career panel on aerospace. My name is Susan Zarwell. I'm the Director of College Guidance at University School, and I would also like to give thanks to our alumni office and especially to Leah Wawaszewski, who helped put this evening's panel together. One of my roles is to work with the Internship and Shadowing Committee, and we help design a variety of different opportunities for students. That has changed somewhat during COVID, and one of the great things that came out of COVID is the fact that we can have these career interest panels where we learn a little bit more about how to get into particular industries, the various paths that our alums have taken into them, and things to think about as you are making your own course choices and thinking about the years ahead. This evening, we bring with us David Routier. He is from the USM class of 2014. He went to the Rochester Institute of Technology and is now an RF microwave design engineer with Northrop Grumman. Northrop Grumman designs, develops, builds, and supports some of the world's most advanced products, from cutting-edge aircraft and next-generation spacecraft to cybersecurity systems and all-seeing radars. We also have with us Ben Tyson. He is from the USM class of 2003. He is also a graduate of Duke University and the University of Virginia School of Law and the Darden School of Business. And he is now a senior counsel at Boeing, where he serves as an executive in Boeing's Services Division for U.S. fighters, including the F/A-18 Super Hornet, the EA-18 Growler, the F-15 Eagle II, the A-10 Thunderbolt, and helicopters including the V-22 Osprey and the CH-47 Chinook and the AH-64 Apache. So some super cool tools there. And also Emmy Wiederhold, who from the USM class of 2016, she went to Washington University in St. Louis and is now a user interface developer for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And she's been working on projects related to the Mars Perseverance and Curiosity rovers. So thank you all very much for being here this evening. We are delighted to have you here. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy and fascinating schedules to talk to our current students. So at this point, I'm wondering if we can learn a little bit more about how did you become interested in aerospace? Is this an interest that you had in high school, or did you come to it later? And we will just go through alphabetically. So David, we'll begin with you.
Hey, so I really didn't know much about the aerospace industry coming out of high school. I knew I was kind of on a technology and engineering track. Technology's always been interested to me. In high school, I really kind of hit my stride, found out that I really liked the computers side of things, so that pushed me into more of a computer and electrical engineering path in college. I actually double majored in computer engineering and electrical engineering. And while I was at RIT, one of the interesting things about RIT is they have a co-op program. So you need a full year of co-op to graduate with your degree. So it's 5 years, 4 years of school and a year of co-op. During my co-ops, my first one, I was doing more of a software support type role. It was interesting, but I didn't really like it. And then, so I looked to branch out for my second co-op, and I found an internship in co-op at Northrop Grumman. And that's really kind of what introduced me to the aerospace world. I always thought I would end up more in the consumer electronics side of things, but once I got to Northrop Grumman and experienced what they did, I just fell in love instantly and really discovered my dream job. So that's how I became interested in it, was really trial by fire.
All right, Ben, how about you?
Sure. So, I mean, I've been interested in aerospace on and off since I was, very little. I wanted to be an astronaut like everyone else. That I could tell. It's a great thing to be when you're a kid. It became very clear that that was not going to actually happen. And so more or less, I just forgot about it for a while. And so at USM, when I was graduating from USM, I would have said I have no idea. I would not have put aerospace as a possible career for myself. I did have an interest in sort of STEM type things, but also everything else. Just whatever class it was happened to be more or less interesting to me. But then after college, let's see, I went off and got a degree in history, kept, you know, and then actually went to law school. And after a few jobs with law firms, a few jobs with judges, I then ended up at Boeing here in St. Louis, which is where we make all the very cool stuff that Zarwell was just mentioning. Now, I think that's sort of an interesting thing actually to talk about for a quick second, which is when you think of aerospace, you think of STEM type careers, right? And those absolutely are the core of what the aerospace industry does, because without really good engineers, we're not going to get that FAA team that's in the background behind me. But also, there are many, many non-STEM employees at a place like Boeing. I mean, I'd say we have 150,000 employees, maybe 145,000 now. And of those, I would say only roughly half are engineers. I think to the leadership team I'm on, which is a business for the platform, the weapon systems that was mentioned in the beginning. And I think about the people on the leadership team with me for that business. It's me who's a lawyer. We have our chief of engineers. We also have, then we have marketing folks, HR folks, comms folks, and everyone else. And so I think those careers are out there for anyone who both has a STEM background or not. And at the end of the day, I think it's really all about being employed in an industry you like, because I often say being a lawyer is pretty similar, more or less everywhere. Being a comms person, pretty similar, more or less everywhere. But the only way you're going to actually succeed in this job or any job you have is actually to take a real interest in the industry you're in. And we have extremely cool products. And so that's what's a lot of fun for me. And so that's how I ended up here in aerospace, and I don't think I'll ever leave because, you know, I really enjoy it. I spent last week, for example, crawling around on top of an F-18, and can't really do that anywhere else. And it seems better than, you know, previous jobs I've had where I was in telecom. Not that there's anything wrong with that. So that's it.
Thank you, Ben. Emmy, how about you? How did you find your way to aerospace?
Yeah, so I wasn't really initially interested in aerospace. I was initially an architecture major in college, but I think I've always been interested in outer space and what's out there and the stars and the galaxies, even just from when I was young. And so even just with that lingering throughout college, as I went through my college process and picked up like a part-time job, I started doing things that were potentially more related to space and got me talking with people who worked in aerospace. And it really piqued my interest. And yeah, I mean, I never anticipated going into aerospace. And really, I have the people around me to thank for pushing me and telling me that it was possible to go work for NASA. And yeah, I think it just turned that kind of interest in the stars and the galaxies and things into a real job. When I realized that you can do that, it is possible, it is something that you can do. So yeah, not something I ever anticipated doing, but I'm really glad that I'm here.
Great, thank you. All right, David, going back to you, can you tell us a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I'm a RF microwave design engineer. There's kind of a few different ways you can go with that in my department. You can go into a design type role. I guess I should preface this with I'm a little bit more on the sensors and signals side of the plane or whatever it may be. So we do a lot of radars, communication systems, stuff like that. So within my department, you can go either towards like a design side where you're designing the antenna. You can go to architecture and analysis, which is a little bit of design, but a lot more of system performance, analyzing data, analyzing simulations, making sure you meet your specs. Or what I do in my personal role is integration and test. So after the designers and the analysis guys have done all their work to make sure that the antenna we're designing will meet specs, we build it, and then I get to play with all the cool and shiny new toys and figure out why they never work the first time and how to get them working. And it's really hands-on. We're typically in the lead up to getting hardware, we're doing a lot of test design, test planning, getting ready so that we can hit the ground running once we have the hardware. And then once we actually do have the hardware, we spend a lot of time typically in anechoic chambers, test ranges, actually feeding the RF through the antennas to make sure that we're hitting our radiated power specs, if it's our gain specs, stuff like that, to make sure that the antenna does actually perform as it is intended to, but also because due to manufacturing tolerances and things like that, we have to tune our arrays to make sure that they do meet the performance. It's basically calibrating them. So that process can take anywhere from a few days to a few months, depending on the complexity of the system. So that's what we do a lot of the time. Because of security concerns, the ranges are windowless rooms, pretty isolated from outside interference, such as cell towers and stuff like that. But it's really cool being there, actually hands-on, working with it, troubleshooting when it doesn't work, and just working with the mechanicals, the software people, and everybody to make sure that we can get it working and out the door and shipped to the customer.
And are you working predominantly alone? Are you working with a partner, a team? Can you tell us a little bit about the structure of your day-to-day?
Yeah, so day-to-day, typically you're working in a team. I'm a little bit of a larger program. We have about 8 people or so. Some of the smaller programs may only be a team of 2 or 3, but there's we have a lot of programs. You can leverage a lot of stuff, so it's not like you're starting from scratch every single time. But yeah, day-to-day flow is pretty much, if there's some individual planning or design work like that, you might sit at your desk and do that. If you're actually in the test phase, you're in the range with your team, supervising the tests as they're running, analyzing the data, making sure it's what you expect. And because of what we do, everything from test design planning all the way through to getting it out the door to the customer, you kind of go through phases, but no day is really the same. It's a good variety of work.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ben, how about you? What's a day-to-day life for you like?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm the legal officer for a business which has a lot of different component parts and a lot of different products. And so I'm on a leadership team for this that has basically one representative and the CEO for this business from each different vertical. So HR, comms, engineering, et cetera. And so most of my time is spent reviewing the sort of products they're working on, the campaigns they're working on, just getting the discussion on an update on where the business is going as a whole. And so I'd say about half my day is spent on legal issues that actually come up. And so, it could be anything from, we want to sell F-18s to Finland. What does that mean? Can we have this meeting, that meeting with people in Finland, or does that violate some sort of law out there? Alternatively, listen, we want to agree to this sort of contract, or this sort of supplier is getting us in trouble, et cetera. I don't actually answer those questions myself anymore, but I find lawyers who do know the answer. And so I will refer those out and find people that actually do know the answer, and they'll come back to me. And then I'll basically spot the issues in the business and make sure I find someone who knows how to answer them. The other half, and this is true of the HR folks, comm folks, anyone else, is you're in all these meetings and you're expected to contribute not just in your lane. And so at that point, you really do need to know a lot about the aerospace and defense industry, a lot about whatever world you're playing. And I'd imagine this is true across other industries too. And so at that point, it's evaluating bids like anyone else. Do we want to compete on this? Do we want to sell F-18s to Finland in the first place? And so, you know, spending a lot of time talking about that.
All right, thank you. All right, and then Emmy, how about you? What's a day-to-day job like for you?
Yeah, so my day-to-day is similar to what you two said, pretty different every day. I have two main roles right now. So depending on which hat I'm wearing on which day, it kind of changes what I work on. For my first role as a user interface developer, I will, if I'm wearing that hat that day, I'll typically take a look at what type of code I need to write that day, if I need to fix any bugs. The teams I'm on for those software projects use what we call the agile development process. And so typically we'll have a quick meeting every day to tag up with our team and see what everyone's working on, what blockers they might have, or if we can tag team some different problems for the day. So that's typically very collaborative. I do have a couple projects that are more solo coding projects. So some days I'll be working with a team on one thing. Some days I'll be working on my own coding project. So that's kind of the user interface stuff that involves websites and phone apps too. The other role is quite a bit different. Technically, it's systems engineering. And so I'm a member of our systems team for the MSL Curiosity rover, which took this picture. And so on the engineering team, we do operations for the rover every day because we're still roving around Mars. And if I'm wearing that hat on some day, I could be on shift. And so what a shift would look like for me on a given day would be, so with the rovers, we have both uplink and downlink. So when we send sequences to the rover to execute what we want it to do that day is uplink, and then downlink is all the data it sends back to us on how it did and how it performed those activities. So typically we start the day with downlink assessment, which includes a lot of people and a lot of experts who know about all the subsystems like heating and telecommunications and all of the instruments. There's a lot of subsystems. So it's very collaborative, and the position I'm in actually kind of collects all of those subsystems together so that we can do a full assessment of how healthy the rover is for that day for the downlink on the data it's sent back to us. And then we can pass that on to the uplink side of the day. So we can tell them what activities they're allowed to do and any maintenance that we need to do on the rover for that day. So two very different roles. So some days I'm on shift planning things for the rover and making sure it's safe and healthy. And other days I am programming a website or a phone app.
Right.
Overall, very collaborative. So.
All right, so none of you have a job that is the same from day to day, and none of you would describe it as a standard desk job.
Nope.
Okay. I'd be interested to know, like, what opportunities in college or grad school best prepared you for the position that you have now? David, let's start with you.
Yep. So the easy one to say for me would be the co-op program. That's really what got me into the role, helped me find my job.
Can you tell us a little bit about what a co-op program is?
Right. So I mentioned it earlier, but at RIT, engineering degrees are 5-year degrees, 8 semesters of school mixed with 2 double block co-ops, where a double block is considered a summer and a fall semester, or a spring semester and a summer. So typically you're in school full-time your first 2 years. Your 3rd year and your 4th year, depending on which block you're assigned, you'll either do a fall semester and then a co-op for spring and summer, or you'll do a summer fall co-op and then are back at school for the spring semester. And then your final year, your 5th year, you're back in school full-time to graduate.
And that's where you're working directly with a company. You're not in a campus classroom. You're actually in the workplace working
Right.
directly.
It is it is a full-time job. You are at the company doing work alongside the engineers or whatever role you may be in. You're there working as if you were a full-time employee. Most company, it's not, you're not the office coffee runner. You're actually doing the work alongside the employees. Aside from the co-op program, really what I would say prepared me was some of the more, I guess, like elective classes that allowed you to dive deeper into a specific topic. Like I did some in renewable energy, thought it was really cool, didn't really feel it was for me. I did one in RF. I enjoyed that one. It helped me with my job for sure. And a lot of it also is talking to people. Find out what your friends are interested in and what they do in their free time, what they're researching or whatever. Engineers are always researching something. So just talk to people, find out what they're doing, because a lot of the time you'll think, oh, that's cool, I should look into that further. And then 8-10 hours later, it's 4 a.m. and you're way down the Wikipedia rabbit hole because you found something you really enjoyed. But really just getting that, just getting those seeds planted in your head and investigating them helps you to find what you're looking for.
Thank you. All right, Ben, what opportunities did you take advantage of at Duke and Virginia to help you prepare for your work at Boeing?
So as far as directly on Boeing, pretty much none, because I wasn't, looking for a career in aerospace per se, or really at all. I mean, previously to coming to Boeing, I was a partner at a law firm in Chicago. Didn't know anything about aerospace and defense, commercial aviation, or anything like that. And Boeing, fortunately, in the law department, has a view that, listen, we'll just hire capable people and we'll teach you everything you need to know about aerospace specific, and you can figure it out. But thinking back to college, I mean, how did I end up here in a position where I was able to get into aerospace at the start? And I think, if I have one piece of advice, does anyone ask me today what classes I took in college or what grades I got in college? Absolutely not. It hasn't come up in a very long time. But I also graduated right in probably the best, most stable economy we've had since anyone here can really remember on the call. Yeah, I graduated in 2007, which was sort of the last good day right before the financial crisis. And so jobs were pretty easy to come by. That said, one time when college grades do matter is getting your first job. It is a lot easier to get a first job if you have good grades. That doesn't mean you need to have good grades to succeed. It just makes your first job a lot easier. And so coming from USM here, you are prepared to go to any college that you can and do as well as you possibly can. I wouldn't recommend having that be your sole focus, but to the extent that you have the time to actually put a little more effort into the academics and are just thinking, maybe I'll watch the Badgers game on Saturday instead, just think about it. Your first, depending on the economic climate, you're getting out your first job is a lot easier. And so that's all I'd really say.
All right, thank you. That's an interesting insight. Emmy, how about you? What are some of the opportunities you had at Washu that helped prepare you, both in and out of the classroom?
Yeah, I think my answer probably ends up being a bit similar to David's, because I think the key for me was just trying out a lot of elective classes that I thought maybe sounded interesting and seeing whether it was a good fit for me or not. And additionally, the programs outside of school, whether that was an internship, I should say outside of classes, whether that was an internship over the summer, or I also worked as a teaching assistant for some of my favorite classes because it helped me to even better understand the content by teaching it to other students and also make more connections with the different professors around the university. Yeah, I think those would probably be the biggest for me. With elective classes, it really is just seeing if something does fit for you. Because for me, initially being an architecture major, I was taking computer science classes because I thought they sounded cool and I wanted to try it. And I thought I would get a minor in computer science once I took a class or two and thought it was a pretty good fit. But as time went on, I ended up flipping those two and got a major in computer science and a minor in architecture, all thanks to just having a little bit of interest in trying something that wasn't in the core curriculum, but turned out to be my passion.
Yeah, Ben. Hey, can I just add one more thing? I mean, I've had the benefit of going to school twice, right? So, or I guess 3 times if you count business. But one thing that became clear to me in law school, which I didn't appreciate in undergrad, but wish I had, is to pick on what she just said, is your professors are actually super interesting, and they're doing a lot of really interesting things. And it doesn't take any effort at all to get to know them. I mean, they're happy to talk to you about whatever they're doing. And so if there's any area that remotely interests you, they'll be glad to talk to you. And also, your classmates are super interesting. I mean, any school you go to, you have classmates that are from all across the country and doing a wide variety of things. And some of them may be doing work in areas you never even thought about. And aerospace could be one of them. So get to know them, even though people are, you usually seek out the people that are like you and are familiar when you get there because it's easier. But maybe after you get to know them, try to get to know a lot more people.
It kind of piggybacking on that idea, very often we see kids who are like, they are hell-bent on a particular major or a particular school. This is exactly what I'm going to do. I've owned the sweatshirt since I was 6, whatever it may be. For you, like, how much certainty did you have heading into college, heading into your careers? Like, if you could go back and talk to yourself as a sophomore, junior, or senior at USM, what advice would you give yourself? That were you too focused, not focused enough? What advice would you give yourselves?
I would say do exactly what you're doing. As I mentioned, I really found what I enjoyed when I was at USM. So by the time I was starting to look at colleges, I knew exactly what I wanted in a school, so I could go out there and go down my list of criteria and find the perfect match.
Well, I'm just going to jump in a little bit because you were very active in building our innovation center, and you were hugely influential in the programming around that. Just for our younger students who may not know that history, can you tell us a little bit about some of the things you were doing at USM?
Right. So when I was a sophomore, I believe it was, Mrs. at the time, Lusick, I don't remember her new name, had the idea of a Genius Bar, kind of run by students to help support the technology staff, help lighten their workload a little bit with just some of the mundane everyday tasks. And so I was one of 2 students at the time that took her up on that, and it really kind of morphed from just kind of supporting technology into what the House of Tech is today. And when I was there, at least, like, we were doing some amount of computer lab design and stuff like that. I'm not too certain what's happening now, but it really has morphed into the larger Lubar Center as well. So it's really developed from just a handful of students being the local Genius Bar to help the teachers and other students. And because of that experience I had with researching network designs, digging into computer issues, not every issue is just flip a switch or something. Some of them are very confusing and you have to do a lot of research. But through doing that, that's how I realized that, like, the kind of computer engineering, electrical engineering world was what I wanted to do, because I didn't mind working with the user interface and some of the more CS type of things, but I really enjoyed hardware. Hardware was my thing. So that's what kind of pushed me towards, especially electrical engineering. I went in as a computer engineer because I wanted to have that understanding of the interface between the electrons and the software. And that, to me, in my current job has been unbelievably helpful, because we are working at the firmware level, figuring out why are we sending this command, but the antenna is doing that, typically the complete opposite or worse. So it's a lot of understanding that border is very important as everything starts to digitize now. And so that ultimately is what pushed me into the major I ended up choosing at college. So looking back, I wouldn't change a thing.
Ben, how about you? What advice would you
Well,
give
you asked
yourself?
you ask a pretty broad question, so I'll give you sort of a pretty broad answer. I think my first thing, so I have a daughter that is 6 months old right now. And so for the first time, I've actually thought about schools. And right about now, when I look at them, I'm basically calling my parents every week to say, thank you for sending me to USM. That must have been, that's a tremendous hardship and sacrifice. It's and so thank your parents now, because they are doing you a tremendous favor that is going to do so much for you going forward in the future. So, I mean, that would be number one. But number two is, don't necessarily think you know what you want to do right now. I mean, I was re-listening to the Red album the other day, which is excellent. I think there's Taylor Swift saying, how could you know everything at 18 but nothing at 22? And that's very true. You think about how many different places you've jumped through. So even if you think you want to do aerospace right now, I fully encourage you, do everything you can to pursue that path, because it's an awesome industry. But also be willing to sort of, with open eyes, examine if that's really what you want to be doing 4 years in. Because you can otherwise find yourself down a path 10 years in where you're in an industry that you actually don't like, and you're only doing it because 15-year-old you actually said that you wanted to do it. And so you've got plenty of opportunities to reevaluate and experience new things. And so I would do that. And I mean, finally, I mean, high school me, what I'd say, take care of your physical and mental health. Like, this is things that, you don't really think about in your 20s, but it's super important. And it's a lot easier to take care of when you have it. So.
And even more so now with COVID. Emmy, how about you? What advice would you give to yourself?
I think, again, similar answer to David, but for a different reason. I think I would say don't change anything, but because I didn't actually know exactly what I wanted to do. And so my approach to college was to pick architecture because I thought I was interested in it, even though I didn't have vast experience in it yet. But I also went into the college selection process knowing that I wanted to pick a school where I would be allowed to change and encouraged to change my major if I thought that was the right choice. And so I ended up picking Washu because I knew they had a pretty strong architecture program. But also when I met with their like student visitor guiders, the people who guide you around campus and answer your questions, I made sure to ask, like, I think I'm interested in architecture, but if I'm not, how easy is it to change? And that ended up being crucial because I did change, and it was very easy as the visitor guider told me it would be. And so for that reason, I would say don't change, because I had an open mind and thought that I might not stay with architecture. And even if I did, it still would have gone well. And so from that aspect, yeah, keep an open mind. Yeah, I think that's the key for me.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'd be interested to learn a little bit more about what skill sets your employers are looking for in the hires that they have now? What kinds of things are they hoping to get? And I don't know to what extent you can actually speak to this, how closely affiliated you are with the hiring process or helping to train the new people who are brought onto the teams on which you operate. But it'll be interesting to hear. David, how about you?
So like you mentioned, I'm not terribly involved with the hiring process, but I do see the emails coming out about, refer your friends. We need new people. I know right now we're in a big hiring push pretty much across the board for engineers. We've been winning a lot of contracts lately, and we need people to staff them. So anything from mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, to do anything from circuit design, digital design, antenna design or tests like I do. We have our own chip fab. So you hear about the chip shortage. We're somewhat affected, especially with like FPGAs and some of the more control type stuff. But overall, we're pretty much unaffected because most of the important stuff we make ourselves, actually, just up the street from my location. So that's microelectronic engineers, material scientists, and quality engineers, industrial engineers, figure out, why things fail when they fail. We're running into an issue right now when we cold soak, we have some wire bonds breaking on the chips, which is what actually attaches the chip to the circuit board. So we're working through that issue right now, and it's just such a broad range of possible careers between, the engineering and, like Ben said, all the support roles too, the people actually bidding the contracts, legal that reviews them, even down to the manufacturing techs who actually build the stuff we design. Because, when you're working with defense systems, we can't just have China or India or whoever manufacture it, because it's all classified technology. We have to make it ourselves, make sure it stays with us, make sure our manufacturing processes stay with us so other places can't replicate it, stuff like that. So you pretty much have the entire global industry and supply chain within one company. So when you say we're hiring, a ton of engineers, it's not just the engineers, it's the engineers and then everybody else who supports them.
Just out of curiosity, how many of you have security clearances of some kind? Just by a show of hands. Okay. All right. And then and for Ben and Emmy, are security clearances ever something that you would need to deal with, or do you work with folks who do have some kind of security clearance, or does that defense piece of things ever affect you?
Oh, no, so it's a issue. I'm in the process right now, which takes about a year and a half. It's a big pain. And so when I was at the Supreme Court, I said, I actually don't really need one of those, and it takes a year. You have to, among other things, figure out every place you've ever traveled and take a lie detector test. Now I actually have to get it. But for me, it's not an issue right now because I have attorneys who do have the clearance. That does mean I have to rely on their work a little bit more. So, for example, the F-22, which we do some work on, is a class. At this point, you need all sorts of classification. The F-18 right here, fortunately, that's a less classified program because it's been around for a while. But yes, I mean, the security clearance is absolutely something that is good for you in the defense industry. It takes a long time, so depending on which level. So.
Fun little tidbit, when they call about security clearances and make sure that you graduated and that kind of thing, our office is the one that they call. And so we field a few of them every now and then, even when people are like in their 60s, we're just like, we have to like run to the little archive closet and make sure like, yeah, they graduated. Yeah.
You don't think it's weird when the FBI just calls about one of your former students, I hope.
No, we don't. It happens actually more than you'd think. I mean, how about
Well,
you?
that's
Is there anything for NASA that and the Jet Propulsion Lab that involves security clearances?
There definitely are some things that involve security clearances, but because I don't have one, I don't really know much about them. I just know that they exist. The only one that I do know about that I can speak of, because it doesn't matter anymore, is back when Microsoft was first developing the augmented reality HoloLens. Our lab, our operations visualization lab, was like one of the first customers for that before it was released. And so that's the only familiarity I have with anyone I've directly worked with needing a security clearance, was because that headset was top secret before it was released to the public. And so doing development work with it required some secret certifications. So that's the only one I know about, though. The other ones, they're somewhere on lab, but I don't know what they do.
Can I add one thing? I know we have a bunch of younger people on here. Things that don't go together are security clearances and weed. It just doesn't, regardless of the way state law works. It's still illegal under federal law. It's still an issue for security clearances. So just keep that in mind as you go off into the real world.
Okay, that good to know, and especially as some states where it has been so legalized.
And
yeah. So
just to piggyback off of that, don't do it. But if there is anything on the forms that it asks about, don't hide it, because that's the best way that you won't get your clearance. They want to make sure that you're being honest with them. So if you've done it, 9 times out of 10, they won't care, but you just have to disclose it.
okay, all right.
Fun panel.
Yeah, you weren't expecting that question. All right. It also, speaking of questions, there is a Q&A button for those of you who are in attendance. If you have questions that you would like to pose to our panelists, please do type them into the Q&A. I'll also ask you how you are remaining current and continue to learn now that you are out of school and fully into the job. Are you involved in any professional organizations? How are you keeping up with your reading partnerships and so on? How do you keep your brain fed in the field? David, let's start with you.
So first of all, I'm not actually out of school. I'm currently working on a master's degree part-time, Master's of Science in Electrical and Computer Engineering at Johns Hopkins. So that's keeping me busy in a lot of my free time. I still have plenty of free time, but just less free time than I would have if I weren't in school. But one of the interesting things, at least in the defense industry, most of the companies I talk to will pay for you to get a master's degree once you're out of school. So if you think you want to get a master's degree at some point, don't automatically assume you have to go do an extra year or 2 of school full time, because that's a year you're not making money, you're just spending money on tuition, and if you can have your employer pay for it, why not? Aside from that, I do need to get my IEEE membership. That's the main organization of electrical engineers. I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's like our trade organization, and they publish journals and have all sorts of cool articles and stuff like that. I just get them from my coworkers who have the membership. So you can learn new things that way, but also, especially in the defense industry, and particularly on the design side, because we are working to constantly stay one step ahead of our adversaries, we are the cutting edge. A lot of the articles you find in like the IEEE journals are written by our peers. I actually know people who have several published articles who are in my small 100-person department, because we are the cutting edge in the world to stay ahead of our potential adversaries or even our allies.
Thank you. Ben, how are you keeping current and continuing to learn?
The amazing thing is now, whatever industry you're in, there's a podcast for that industry, which actually tells you a ton about what's in there. And it took me actually several years to realize this, and it's really helpful. I mean, and take, for example, cybersecurity, a big issue in the Defense Department supply chain right now. You know who puts out a fantastic cybersecurity podcast each week? Northrop Grumman, which is where he is. And you know what? I listen to it each week, and it actually provides a good update for everything. But I think at least if you're at an Aerospace, and I don't know what JPL is like, so I can't really speak to that, but at least if you're at one of the major defense contractors like Northrop or Boeing, or a major commercial airlines company like Boeing or Airbus, I guess, are the only two at this point. But you should learn as much about it as you possibly can. I mean, there's a reason I was in the F-18 factory the other day, and that's because I wanted to learn about the engineering side of it, and I wanted to spend more time actually learning how this stuff is built. And so getting out, there is more than enough that you can learn from the other 100,000, 50,000 employees at your company than you can possibly ever learn in a lifetime. And you see that those are the people who are really successful in the company, actually. We have, our CEO before this CEO was an engineer, but he was an engineer that had learned all other aspects of the role too. And so he spent a lot of time just getting to know how, you can design a plane. Now go ask the salespeople how they actually sell the plane, et cetera. At JPL, go actually ask how they get funding for this, because guess what? That's actually super important too. And so I think it's really talking to your colleagues for as many things as possible that are, quote, not your job, but actually really are, even though it's not what you're supposed to be doing day to day.
No, sorry. No, knowing everybody else's position is super important. Emmy, how about you? How are you continuing to learn in your job?
Yeah, a lot of similar things to what Ben said about just really diving into what everyone else does around me at my job as well. So one part of that, we just have a lot of talks that happen a lot of the time, and they just get posted on our Slack channels or emailed to us. And if I'm even remotely interested, it's usually just, hop on and listen for an hour, ask some questions, and learn about something totally new that I would have never been introduced to otherwise on the lab. So that's really fascinating. Like today I learned about some lasers that they're hoping to send into space on the Psyche mission, which I didn't know was happening. So really fun. Something else is that I mentioned I do some systems engineering with the MSL rover. And the fun thing about that is I was never formally trained in any form of engineering at school. I only did computer science. And so I've actually been in training for that systems engineering role since February of this year. And that is half of my job time is spent doing this learning and this training about something that I was never exposed to in school. And so I think just in general, JPL has a great culture of encouraging continued learning. And all of those things. So yeah, I feel like I'm always learning things, whether it's going to a talk or starting a new role that I have to learn something for. I just happened to land in one that took 8 months of learning, but I'm super grateful for it. And yeah, learning new things every day.
Are all of you involved in on-the-job training on a regular basis in some way?
I mean, to an extent, engineering is on-the-job training. It's just the way it is because you never have all the answers. You're always going to be talking to other people from other teams, and they're going to tell you far more than you ever needed to know to solve your problem, but it expands your horizons. You learn about other areas, other fields, and particularly in the defense industry, at least that I've noticed from myself and several of my friends from RIT is about all they care about for initially hiring you is, can you learn? Because as I said, what we do is so advanced, you're never going to learn it in school. And all they care is, can you learn it once you're here doing the job, pick it up, and then grow in your career from there. So really, every day is on the job training and new learning opportunities.
Yeah, I would agree with most all of that. I mean, school definitely prepared me for my job, but nothing beats the real experience to actually learning how to do it. So.
And for that matter, in my career, I've never remotely had a class which I mean, in college, I was a history major. Then I went to Bain & Company and was a management consultant. And that has absolutely nothing to do with it being a history major. And so it's mainly on the job learning, but it really never stops. You just sort of have to approach it with the same mindset and curiosity that you had as a student. It's just there aren't any tests anymore, so hopefully you enjoy doing it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So if those who are watching, if you've got questions, please do enter them into the Q&A so we get a chance to ask. But in these final few minutes, I'd love to know, what are some of the major issues that you see your particular companies trying to address now? What do you see as the major challenges ahead that Northrop Grumman or Boeing or the Jet Propulsion Labs will be dealing with in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some of the problems that your companies are hoping to solve?
Cybersecurity. I mean, it's a giant deal. And you talk about being on the cutting edge. It's a race between two sides on the cutting edge. You know, you're trying to block. This is things I barely understand, and I know it is a super serious deal for each and every company or defense contractor in the United States. Fact is, there's some pretty smart people who really want to take things from you. And so that is a giant deal, and it's become a priority from the White House, and I don't see that stopping whatever political administration that we're in.
Yep, and same thing, cybersecurity, and I wouldn't even necessarily wall that off into just like protecting the internet and things like that. It also includes electronic warfare. You know, how can you make sure you see your enemy, but your enemy doesn't see you, type of thing? How can we win the battle in the Middle East or wherever it may be without ever firing a shot? So a lot of that, we're in a huge digital transition. You're seeing it, if you Google it, you'll see the big transition away from kinetic energy weapons and going towards electronic warfare. Because yes, the acquisition cost is higher up front, but long-term it's cheaper and it keeps our troops safer.
The defensive side, NASA is going to do some awesome stuff over the next few years. And so that's on the good side, right? So
yeah, I think just to add on, I mean, yes, cybersecurity is very important. I think something that every company is probably facing is remote work and how to do hybrid work, especially given the pandemic and everything that's been going on, and how transitioning back to in-person work may work. The other big thing that a lot of companies have been looking into over the last year and should continue to is all the DE&I, like diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. I think at JPL specifically, we're working really hard to improve our diversity, equity, and inclusion because we realize that the more diverse perspectives and opinions we get, the better our work will be in the end. And so that's a big goal of ours as well.
All right.
And just to add one more thing on that is, in addition to DEI, I forgot about the sort of ESG side of the business. I mean, sustainability is hugely important in what we're doing. You think it is sort of lip service from time to time, potentially on the commercial airlines business. It's not. I mean, it's something that is being top of mind, whether we have sustainable fuel planes or hydrogen planes going forward. That is going to be a bigger and bigger deal going on.
All right. With all of that in mind and thinking of building broader, deeper relationships, one of the questions that came in, did you know people and have connections at the jobs you applied to, or did you just apply, and how did those applications and interviews work?
So for me, for my first internship I did, that was with it was with Spectrum, the massive cable company. That one I really I spammed internship applications out everywhere. I think I had 100 or something like that. And ultimately I got a few interviews, and that's the one I decided on because it seemed the coolest with the best company to build
Is
my
that many applications typical?
For a first internship, at least at RIT, they typically say at least 40 to 50 is what you'll have to do. Maybe it's gotten better since, now that there's a lot more demand for engineers overall. The job market's changed a lot in the last 5-6 years since I was looking for my first one. But from what I heard among my peers, yeah, that was pretty typical at least for the first one. The second one, way easier, but it's getting that foot in the door. And then from there, I actually got my co-op and internship at Northrop Grumman from the career fair that RIT did. Northrop Grumman was there. I talked to them at their booth. I had an interview the next day, which was really just, is this something you think you would be interested in doing? Tell me a bit about your interests. Well, here's what we do. Do you see yourself as a fit for any of these? And a few days later, I had an offer from them, and I accepted that. And then that got me into my department. As I said, I eventually fell in love with the role, and I direct hired back into my same department.
I mean, absolutely. It's very, at this day and age, it's with LinkedIn and whatnot, it's difficult to think about going into a job completely cold. I mean, some jobs are like that. But I think at each stage in my career, I've at least known someone at whatever job or whatever company, because there's a lot of really good candidates out there. And it's that sort of thing which makes you, stand out. I mean, to the extent anyone ever wants to talk about Boeing, come talk to me. To the extent you're looking for a job in any sort of field, just get on LinkedIn and see what sort of USM grads are there, et cetera. And, most of them are pretty willing to talk to you. And it doesn't mean you can't get a job without connections. Absolutely not. I'm just saying it's much easier if you can have a talk, learn more about the industry that you're in, because you can see what the company actually cares about rather than going into this whole discussion blind.
Yeah.
So specifically to my point, I actually had a friend who was interviewing for this job, and the job I currently have. And I had clerked with her in DC. She had gone through the process, and all of a sudden realized that, she did not want to move to St. Louis, Missouri, which that's where fighter planes are made, and said, well, you should meet my friend Ben Tyson, because he would move to St. Louis. And next thing you know, I, went through the process, and that's how I got that job. And it doesn't mean that she wasn't an inside Boeing person, but at that point it was a connection all the way through. And so that, just meet as many people as you can. You should be being nice to everyone anyway. If you're not, that would be another good reason to do it. But just broaden your horizons as far as possible.
I would say for me, at least, so I've only worked at NASA so far because I graduated college last May. And so this is my first job and my only job so far. And initially, I actually didn't have any connections directly to NASA. Eventually, my connections did become crucial, but for my first internship, I interned at NASA Goddard, which is in Maryland, a totally separate center from JPL. And for that, I had a similar experience to what David said. I actually sent out a lot of applications for internships, not quite as many, maybe about 30 or 40. And I got a call on my phone one day that had a Maryland area code, and I thought, I should probably pick this one up just in case. I had no connections to NASA when I applied for that and was given that internship offer. I actually just had a friend who said, yes, you can apply to NASA. And that was that turning point moment of, oh, I can really do this. And so I initially had no connections, but following that internship, some of my coworkers at a part-time job at school were like, oh, you interned at NASA. You should meet this professor at Washu who also does NASA things. And so then that became my key connection to JPL, because he ended up actually being a professor at Washu part-time and part-time working at JPL. And so he was then able to introduce me to a bunch of people at JPL who he knew did work I was interested in. And then I got an internship at JPL from there. And as far as interviews go, I think my hardest interview was for the JPL internship. Had to do kind of live coding in a Google Doc over the phone, which was interesting. But for the full-time job, the interview was really the internship. And so the way I performed in the internship was such that they were willing to offer me that full-time job the following year.
And one thing I'll add, when we say, 30, 40, 80, whatever internship applications, it sounds really scary. It's not. With the way all the systems are digitized these days, you can fire that off in less than a day. A lot of it is you make a profile on like LinkedIn or whatever your school might use, and then you just go down the list. Oh, that looks interesting. Apply, 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 apply. And it's not hard. There's very, very little manual intervention you have to do once you actually set up your profile. So while that number sounds scary, it's not as bad as it sounds.
And I mean, to that point, I just want to throw myself in here as well to say, I've applied to 100 law firms at some point in my entire life. I'm pretty sure that I'm still in the process for a lot of these and am expecting a call back any day now. But no, it's just you send them out to as broad of a reach as you can. And one thing though, because we were all talking about connections, sure, maybe some of you are thinking, I don't have any connections. I mean, how does this apply to me? I think what we were all talking about were connections for people that we didn't know in high school. No one knew in high school. No one in our family, no one at USM knew them. It's just you meet them along the way. So do good work and be nice for the people you know, to the people you meet. And those connections sort of lead you in various paths. And so it's connections you make yourself and are more fortuitous. So don't worry if you don't know anyone right now in the aerospace industry besides the three of us. I mean, it's just you'll meet them along the way. And make an effort to meet people. I mean, especially in various fields, law being one of them, sometimes you put your head down, don't want to talk to anyone else. Just make sure you're getting to know other people too.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. There is, if you feel you've got time for one last question with a 1 to 2 sentence answer. The last question that's come in, looking back at your time at USM, is there anything you would have done specifically to help you better prepare or position or set yourselves up to succeed in your aeronautical careers? Is there coursework or extracurriculars you would have involved yourselves in to help cultivate those relationships or particular skills? And then, are any of you pilots?
So I'll start that off with the first one. No, I'm not a pilot. I've always kind of been interested in it, though. I work right next to Baltimore Washington International. I see the planes every day. Some of the time I wonder if I chose the right career. So I'm probably going to get a private pilot's license at some point. Looking back at USM, I wish I had gotten a little bit more exposure to computer science when I was there. That would have not necessarily helped me ultimately in my career, but it would have helped make the college transition a lot easier, because going from almost no CS exposure to being dumped into CS classes at RIT, it was a big adjustment. That was the hardest part for me. And then as far as extracurriculars, I played hockey in all the way growing up at USM. I played intramurals at RIT, and COVID's made it really hard, but I'm trying to find a place to play here in Maryland. And what I would suggest is make sure you have, whatever your thing may be, for me it's hockey, make sure you have an outlet. School is stressful, work can be stressful, you need something that can help you manage that stress. And if that's going out and skating hard on a sheet of ice and hitting a puck as hard as you can, great, do it. But you need something that can help you manage that stress of day-to-day life.
Oh, as far as me, I think the point on stress is really important. I mean, just if you can start to figure out the coping mechanisms you're going to need in the real world for stress, spend some time doing that, where, you know, high school is stressful. There's a lot of angst about, you know, am I going to make this sports team? Am I going to, you know, do well in this and so class? But you do have more free time in that, and in college, than you'll have in the real world, and start to develop sort of those healthy habits before you get out into the real world, where all of a sudden it starts to catch up with you pretty quickly. And if as far as being a pilot, am I a pilot? No. Am I a student pilot? Yes. I'm learning how to fly right now, and that's been fun. It's actually surprisingly difficult in a small plane. But it's been a lot. That's been a lot of fun, and yeah, that's all.
I'm not a pilot either, but I do call myself a rover babysitter, if that counts as flying any sort of spacecraft. So there's that. As far as, what was the other part of the question? Prepare yourself up to succeed. Well, I guess since I didn't know that I wanted to be in aerospace when I was at USM, I'm not sure if there's anything I could have done particularly there. I think a big thing though, which kind of stems off the make sure you have an outlet, is like find some hobbies, find some things that you're really interested in, and you don't have to be good at them necessarily to try them. I know there tends to be a culture of like, oh, you have to be really good at something to say that like you like doing it. Like, I like horseback riding. I've been horseback riding for years. Am I really good at it? No. Do I love it? Yeah. And so find those things, find the hobbies that you enjoy, and just learn more about them, dive as deep as you can into them, and it could even become part of your career. I know
maybe don't have the pilot's license be the one that you're not good at.
That's true. But you don't have to be perfect at everything, I guess is my point. And don't be afraid to try things. Yeah, just because you don't think you'll be good at them doesn't mean you shouldn't try it.
I feel like I'm learning that skill every day, and that's really, yeah, that's huge. There's a lot of fun stuff out there that none of us know how to do.
Well, with a 6-month-old, there's a big learning curve all the way through. So, all right.
Oh, she's perfect. I'm not very good at it. So.
All right. Well, David, Ben, and Emmy, thank you so much for spending so much time with us and giving us insight into your careers and the trajectories that brought you there. This has been super, super helpful, and we are very, very appreciative. Thank you so much for joining. And for those who are in attendance, thank you for coming to be with us this evening. And I will wish you all good night.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for so much.
Thanks for hosting. Have a good night.
You too. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.